All right, guys, so we are going to start talking about different types of reasoning. We should have already covered inductive reasoning at this point. All right, so I'm just going to do a very quick review just to cover what a conditional statement is. So we've covered conditional, we've covered inverse, converse, and contrapositive up to this point. For this section, the only one you are going to need to remember is a conditional statement. All right, and remember, a conditional statement is just the very beginning statement that is in if-then form. All right, so if-then form, if this happens, then this is going to happen, where you have your hypothesis and you have your conclusion. So we've already talked about inductive reasoning. And remember, inductive reasoning is where we make a prediction on what we think is going to happen based off a pattern, but we can't necessarily prove that that's what's going to happen. All right, it's like a hypothesis. It's an educated guess. Deductive reasoning, though, is a little different. So this is where we use facts and things that we've previously known in order to say that something is right. Okay, so deductive reasoning is different from inductive reasoning because it doesn't use patterns, it uses facts. So the very first type of inductive reasoning is called the law of detachment, and it says if a conditional statement and its hypothesis are true, then the conclusion is true. All right, so what that means is if the sentence as a whole is true and something tells us that the hypothesis is true, that means we must know the conclusion. So when I look at example 1, if a figure is a triangle, then the sum of its angles is 180 degrees. All right, so that right there, I'm going to label this right here as my conditional statement. Okay, so when we look at that, if a figure is a triangle, then the sum of its angles is 180 degrees. So we think, okay, is the conditional statement true? And we say, yes, it is true. All right, then we look at what it says next, and it says figure ABC is a triangle. It tells us that that is for sure true. Because this part right here is the hypothesis of our conditional statement, then we can conclude that, I'm going to reword that. We can say that the angles of figure ABC add up to 180 degrees. Okay, so what we did was, because the conditional statement in the beginning was true, this right here, and it gives us the hypothesis again and says that that is true, then we can conclude what the conditional statement said. All right, so then I look at example 2. If the sum of two angles is 90 degrees, then the angles are complementary. So I'm going to label that. That's my conditional statement again. And I have to ask myself, is that a true statement? So if two angles add up to 90 degrees, are they complementary angles? Yes, that is true. If you said no, that's not true, you would just stop there. You wouldn't even continue. All right? You're not going to come across an example when working with law of detachment, though, where that first conditional statement isn't true. Okay, so then I look, it says angle X is 30 degrees and angle Y is 60 degrees. What can you conclude? What can you conclude? So we look at this and we're trying to conclude that the angles are complementary. So I look, if angle X is 30 degrees and angle Y is 60 degrees, does that add up to 90 degrees? Okay, so first we have to figure out, is the hypothesis true? So yes, that adds up to 90 degrees. All right, so because this is our hypothesis again, so sum of two angles is 90 degrees, I can then conclude angle X and angle Y are complementary. Okay, so the statement, let's see, what do I have blank space? Yeah. So the statement was true. All right, so because that happened and the hypothesis was true, then we can say the conclusion as our answer. All right, so that's law of detachment, where the statement is true, the hypothesis is true, so the conclusion must be true. All right, the next and last part of deductive reasoning that we're going to talk about is law of syllogism. All right, so deductive reasoning is split between law of detachment, law of syllogism. Those are the only two parts that we're going to cover. All right, so law of syllogism says that if P to Q, so remember that means a conditional statement form, and Q to R are true, then P to R is also true. So this is going to be really similar to what we call the transitive property, which you should have seen a little bit of. Okay, which if I put this in simple terms, if A equals B and B equals C, then we know that A equals C. All right, so that's what that means. So it's really confusing if you just try to put it in words, but if you look at the first example, all right, if it snows today, then I will wear gloves. If I wear gloves, then my fingers will get itchy. Using the law of syllogism, what we're looking for, if you look at how this is set up, the first one should end with the same thing the second starts with. All right, so that Q is the same thing. So I look, if it snows, then I will wear gloves. That's what that ends with. So the second one has to end with if I wear gloves. If the ending of the first sentence and the beginning of the second sentence are not the same, you can't do it. All right, so I'm going to say that again. If the ending of the first sentence is not the same as the beginning of the second sentence, you can't use the law of syllogism. They have to be the same. So that middle part of this entire two sentences has to be identical. All right, if it is, then I can say P to R is true. What that means is I take out that part that I underlined in pink. All right, so I'm going to cross that out. So I would take that part out and I would just rewrite it like that. So I would say if it snows today, then my fingers will get itchy. All right, so if that middle part's the same, using the law of syllogism, all you do is take out that middle part from both sentences and rewrite it with the very first part of the first sentence and the last part of the second sentence. So we look at another one, and we'll use math in this one. If an integer is divisible by 6, then it is divisible by 2. If an integer is divisible by 2, then it is an even number. So I look in that middle part, so we find the end of the first sentence, and we find the beginning of the second sentence, and are they the same? So it says it is divisible by 2 and an integer is divisible by 2. Because they're the same, what we're going to do is we're going to cross that out. Cross all that out, and we're going to rewrite it with the first part of the first sentence, so that part right there, and the second part of the second sentence. So if an integer is divisible by 6, then it is an even number. Okay, so law of syllogism is a little easier than the law of detachment. They're both pretty simple, all right? I would recommend the first few that you do, especially with law of syllogism, write what I was writing, okay? Cross out that middle part of it and just rewrite what's left over. So cross out the part that's similar, all right? Remember, make sure you took notes. If you didn't take notes, go back, rewrite them, because you don't get credit if you don't actually write the notes. All right, if you have any questions, highlight, star. You can ask questions at the beginning of class before we start any worksheets, before we start any problems. All right, make sure you have all of this written down and ready to go for class tomorrow.